After 30 women had rejected him in his disguise as a homeless man or sometimes a blind man, billionaire Harrison Blake was ready to give up on love forever. But as he stumbled down Fifth Avenue, a gentle voice caught his arm. "Are you hurt?" And the poor farmer's daughter who stopped to help had no idea she was about to change the life of one of America's most powerful men forever. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's continue. The 37th floor of the Blake Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a steel needle, and Harrison Blake stood at its apex, staring down at the ant-like figures scurrying through Times Square below. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who had everything: sharp jawline, steel-gray eyes, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, yet his shoulders carried the weight of profound emptiness. "Mr. Blake?" His assistant Jessica's voice crackled through the intercom. "The quarterly aviation reports are ready for your review." Harrison didn't turn from the window. At 42, he owned the third-largest private aviation company in America, with a net worth that Forbes conservatively estimated at $2.8 billion. He could buy anything, go anywhere, have anyone. So why did he feel like he was suffocating? "Cancel my evening meetings," he said quietly. "All of them." The silence stretched before Jessica responded. "Sir, you have the Peterson merger dinner at." "I said cancel them." Harrison moved to his mahogany desk, its surface pristine except for a single photograph, him with his parents at his Harvard graduation, both deceased now for over a decade. His father had built Blake Aviation from nothing, and Harrison had transformed it into an empire. But empires, he'd learned, were cold places to live alone. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. Hundreds of names, business associates, society figures, women he'd dated briefly before they showed their true colors. All of them drawn to his wealth like moths to flame, burning up any possibility of genuine connection. The dating apps were worse. Even when he tried to be subtle about his success, they always figured it out. The research, the careful questions, the sudden shift in their behavior when they realized who he was. He'd stopped counting after the 15th woman asked about his investment opportunities on a second date. What would it be like, he wondered, to be seen for who he truly was? Not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the man with the penthouse and the private jets. Just him. The idea had been forming for weeks, growing stronger with each hollow interaction. What if he could strip away everything that defined him in the world's eyes? What if he could become invisible, in the most literal sense? 300 miles away, Grace Miller's hands were black with soil as she knelt between the rows of October pumpkins on her family's farm outside Millfield, Pennsylvania. The late afternoon sun painted the rolling hills in shades of amber and gold, and she paused to push a strand of chestnut hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "Grace." Her father's voice carried across the field. "Come help me with the truck." She stood, brushing dirt from her faded jeans, and jogged toward the red barn where her father Thomas struggled with the engine of their ancient pickup. At 28, Grace had the kind of natural beauty that needed no enhancement: clear green eyes, sun-kissed skin, and a smile that could light up a room. But more than that, she possessed a gentleness that made broken things feel safe. 30 rejections. 30 women who'd agreed to meet Henry, only to find excuses within minutes of arrival. He'd endured their polite dismissals, their uncomfortable silences, their barely concealed disgust. Each encounter had chipped away at whatever hope he'd harbored that someone might see past appearances to the person beneath. This would be the last one. After today, he'd return to his penthouse, accept his fate of hollow relationships, and stop believing in fairy tales. The cafe door chimed as he entered, and he oriented himself by the familiar sounds: espresso machine hissing, chairs scraping against wood floors, the low murmur of conversation. He'd chosen this place because it was neutral ground, far from his usual Manhattan haunts. "Henry?" The barista's voice was kind but professional. "Your usual table by the window is ready." He nodded, making his way carefully to the small table where he'd been humiliated 29 times before. The chair felt like a throne of shame as he settled into it, checking his phone for the time. 10:47 a.m. She was 3 minutes late. At 10:52, he heard heels clicking across the floor, then stopping. Henry Brooks. The voice was hesitant, feminine. "That's me," he said, managing a smile. "You must be Jennifer." "Actually, look, I'm really sorry, but something came up. Family emergency. I can't stay." The 31st rejection. Harrison's heart sank as he heard her footsteps retreating quickly. He sat there for a moment, the familiar burn of humiliation spreading through his chest. Around him, life continued, couples laughing, friends chatting, the whole world moving forward while he remained frozen in his web of deception. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several conversations paused. Heat flooded his face as he realized he'd drawn attention, exactly what someone truly blind would try to avoid. His careful disguise was crumbling along with his composure. "Excuse me," he muttered, fumbling for his cane. His hands shook as he tried to orient himself, the cafe suddenly feeling maze-like and hostile. He needed air, needed to escape before his facade completely collapsed. The door seemed miles away. He took several uncertain steps, misjudging the distance to a chair. His hip caught the edge, sending him stumbling sideways. The cane clattered to the floor as he tried to steady himself, his hand knocking over someone's coffee cup. "Oh!" A woman's voice, startled but not angry. "Are you all right?" Harrison froze. He was half bent over a table, coffee dripping onto expensive boots he deliberately scuffed, his disguise in ruins. But instead of irritation or disgust, the voice held genuine concern. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, trying to straighten up. "I'm such a mess, Hey, it's okay." A gentle hand touched his arm, steadying him. "Let me help you." He turned toward the voice and felt his breath catch. Even through his fake blindness, he could sense her presence, the warmth radiating from her skin, the faint scent of vanilla and something floral. When he allowed himself to see her, his heart nearly stopped. She was beautiful, but not in the polished way he was accustomed to. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a few rebellious strands framing her face. She wore a cream-colored sweater that looked hand-knitted, dark jeans, and boots that had seen real use. No makeup except for a touch of lip gloss, but her skin had a natural glow that no cosmetic could replicate. But it was her eyes that undid him completely. Green as spring grass, they looked at him without pity, without judgment, without the calculating assessment he'd grown to expect. They saw him, or thought they did, and somehow found him worthy of kindness. "I'm Grace," she said, retrieving his cane and placing it gently in his hand. "Grace Miller. Are you hurt?" "Henry," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "Henry Brooks. And no, I'm fine. Just embarrassed." "Don't be." She was already signaling the barista, pulling napkins from the dispenser. "Accidents happen. Besides, it was just coffee. Nothing that can't be fixed." Harrison watched her clean up the mess he'd made, her movements efficient but unhurried. She didn't seem to be in a rush to escape his company, didn't glance around to see if anyone was watching her interact with the homeless-looking blind man. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to." She looked up at him, and he quickly adjusted his gaze to slightly past her shoulder. "Are you meeting someone? I saw you sitting alone for a while." The question sent a fresh wave of humiliation through him. "I was supposed to, but she couldn't make it." Grace's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. That's disappointing." "It's probably for the best," he said, surprised by his own honesty. "I'm not exactly a catch." "Says who?" The question came out with such genuine indignation that Harrison looked directly at her before catching himself. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry. It's just, you seem like a perfectly nice person to me." A perfectly nice person. When was the last time someone had described him in such simple, human terms? Not brilliant, not successful, not wealthy. Just nice. "You don't even know me," he said softly. "I know you apologized for something that wasn't your fault. I know you're polite to service workers. I know you carry yourself with dignity even when you're having a bad day." She finished cleaning the table and sat down across from him. "Sometimes that's enough to start with." Harrison stared at her, forgetting to maintain his act. She was looking at him like he mattered, like his presence was a gift rather than a burden. The feeling was so foreign, so powerful, that he felt tears prick his eyes. "Can I buy you a coffee?" she asked. "To replace the one I helped you destroy?" "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'd like to. If you're not in a hurry to be somewhere else. He should leave. Should end this charade before it went any further. But the warmth in her voice, the genuine interest in her eyes, the way she made him feel human for the first time in years, he couldn't walk away. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." Grace smiled, and Harrison felt something inside his chest crack open, not breaking, but blooming. For the first time in 31 attempts, someone was choosing to stay. "Good," she said, standing to approach the counter. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." As she walked away, Harrison touched his chest where his heart was hammering against his ribs. He'd come here expecting another rejection, another confirmation of his unworthiness. Instead, he'd collided with Grace itself, and she'd chosen to see him as worthy of her time. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to become invisible, he'd finally been seen. Have you ever felt like you needed to hide your true self to find genuine connection? What do you think about first impressions and the courage it takes to look beyond the surface? Let us know in the comments, and if this story is touching your heart, please like and share it with someone who believes in the power of authentic human connection. Grace returned with 2 steaming cups, settling back into her chair with a smile that made Harrison's chest tighten. "1 coffee, black, and 1 hot chocolate for me. I figured you for a coffee person." "You figured right," he said, accepting the cup with hands that trembled slightly. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, grounding him in the moment. "Thank you. So, Henry Brooks," she said, wrapping her fingers around her mug. "Tell me about yourself." The question he'd been dreading. Harrison's mind raced through the backstory he'd constructed, but sitting across from her genuine curiosity, the lies felt like acid on his tongue. "There's not much to tell. I'm between jobs right now. Construction work, mostly." "That's honest work," Grace said without a trace of judgment. "My dad always says a man who works with his hands builds the world." Harrison nodded, hating himself for the deception. "What about you? What do you do?" "I teach 3rd grade at Millfield Elementary. It's about an hour outside the city." Her face lit up as she spoke. "The kids are incredible. They see the world with such wonder, you know? Everything's possible to them." "That sounds rewarding." "It is. Challenging, but rewarding." She paused, studying his face. "You have kind eyes, Henry. I bet kids would love you." Kind eyes. If only she knew what those eyes had seen, what they'd calculated, what they'd dismissed as worthless over the years. Harrison looked down at his coffee, the guilt eating at him like a cancer. "I don't know about that," he said quietly. "Trust me, I'm good at reading people. It's an occupational hazard." Grace leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if it's too personal." Harrison's pulse quickened. "Go ahead. How long have you been without sight?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd prepared for this, had a whole story ready about a construction accident 5 years ago. But looking at her open, caring face, the words wouldn't come. He started, then stopped. The silence stretched between them, filled with the cafe's ambient noise and his own thundering heartbeat. "I'm sorry," Grace said quickly. "I shouldn't have asked. It's none of my business." "No, it's complicated." The truth was fighting to break free, but Harrison forced it down. "I'd rather not talk about it, if that's okay." "Of course." She reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching his hand. The contact sent electricity through his entire body. "I understand." But she didn't understand. She couldn't. She was sitting across from a man who was lying to her about everything, his name, his condition, his entire existence. She was showing him kindness he didn't deserve, giving him attention he'd obtained through deception. "Grace," he said, his voice strained, "you should know that I'm not the kind of person you usually spend time with." "What kind of person is that?" "Someone with stability. A home. A future." The words came out bitter, but they were the closest to truth he'd spoken all day. Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mom used to tell me that we're all just walking each other home. Nobody has it all figured out, Henry. We're all just doing our best with what we have." The simple wisdom in her words nearly broke him. Here was this woman, who clearly had her own struggles. He could see it in the way she'd darned a small hole in her sweater, the careful way she'd counted her change when buying the drinks, and she was offering him grace he hadn't earned. "You're very kind," he said, "but kindness can be dangerous." People take advantage. Maybe, she said. But the alternative is worse. Living with walls up all the time, never letting anyone in, that's not living. That's just existing. Harrison's throat tightened. She'd just described his entire adult life with devastating accuracy. Sometimes walls are necessary. To protect yourself from getting hurt. Who hurt you, Henry? The question was so gentle, so devoid of judgment, that Harrison had to look away. Everyone, he wanted to say. Everyone who'd ever wanted something from him, who'd ever pretended to care while calculating his net worth, who'd ever made him feel like his only value was in his bank account. People, he said finally. People who weren't who they pretended to be. Grace nodded slowly. I know something about that. My ex-fiancée left me for a woman whose father owned 3 car dealerships. Said I was too small-town for his ambitions. She shrugged, but Harrison could see the old pain in her eyes. I guess I learned that if someone can't love you as you are, they don't deserve you as you could be. The irony of her words was like a knife to his chest. Here he was, pretending to be someone else entirely, while she spoke about the importance of authenticity. He was becoming everything she'd learned to reject. I should go, he said abruptly, starting to stand. Wait. Grace's hand touched his arm again. Did I say something wrong? No, you said everything right. That's the problem. He sat back down, running a hand through his hair. Grace, you seem like an incredible person. But I'm not. I'm not good for you. Shouldn't that be my decision to make? You don't understand. Then help me understand. Her voice was patient but firm. I'm not some fragile flower who needs protecting from her own choices. I'm a grown woman who can decide for herself who's worth her time. Harrison stared at her, this extraordinary woman who was fighting for a connection with someone she thought was a homeless blind man. The fact that she was willing to advocate for him, to see potential where everyone else saw only problems, made his deception feel even more monstrous. I'm not who you think I am, he said quietly. None of us are, completely. We're all mysteries, even to ourselves. Grace's smile was soft but determined. But I'd like to know more about your mystery, if you'll let me. The offer hung between them like a bridge he desperately wanted to cross but knew would collapse under the weight of his lies. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to end this before it went any further. But her eyes held him captive, full of a hope he didn't deserve but couldn't bear to extinguish. I don't want to disappoint you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The only way you'd disappoint me is if you didn't give us a chance to find out what this could be. Harrison closed his eyes, the weight of his deception crushing down on him. He was trapped between his desperate need for genuine connection and the growing certainty that when she discovered the truth, she would hate him more than all the others combined. Because unlike them, she would have loved him for who he thought he was, not what he had. One more cup of coffee, he said finally. But Grace, I need you to know that I'm more complicated than I appear. Honey, she said with a laugh that sounded like music, we all are. That's what makes us human. As she went to order another round, Harrison sat in his chair, torn between the joy of her acceptance and the agony of his betrayal. For the first time in his life, he'd found someone who could love him for himself, except he wasn't being himself at all. The collision had indeed changed everything. But Harrison was beginning to realize that some impacts left damage that couldn't be undone. When you're attracted to someone, how important is complete honesty from the beginning? Can a relationship built on deception ever become genuine? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complex nature of love and truth. The late October sky had been threatening rain all afternoon, and by the time Grace and Harrison left the cafe, the first fat drops were beginning to fall. Grace pulled her cardigan tighter as they stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Looks like we're in for quite a storm, she said, glancing up at the darkening clouds. My truck's parked about 2 blocks away. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Harrison's mind raced. He couldn't let her drive him to his penthouse, and he had no idea where Henry Brooks was supposed to live. I usually take the bus. There's a stop near here. As if on cue, thunder rumbled overhead, and the light drizzle transformed into a steady downpour. Within seconds, they were both soaked. The bus stop doesn't have a shelter, Grace said, raising her voice over the rain. And you'll catch pneumonia waiting out here. Come on, we can wait it out in my truck. She took his arm gently, guiding him through the rain-slicked streets. Harrison let her lead, acutely aware of her closeness, the way she adjusted her pace to match his carefully measured steps. The guilt of his deception warred with the intoxicating feeling of being cared for without agenda. Grace's truck was exactly what he'd expected, a well-worn blue Ford with a dented bumper and a cracked windshield. She helped him into the passenger seat, her hand briefly touching his shoulder as she reached across to fasten his seatbelt. "Sorry about the mess," she said, climbing into the driver's seat and pushing wet hair from her face. "I keep meaning to clean it out, but between school and the farm." Harrison looked around the cab, noting the stack of children's books on the dashboard, a pair of gardening gloves on the floor, and the faint scent of apple blossoms that seemed to follow her everywhere. It was more authentic than anything in his sterile penthouse. "It's perfect," he said, meaning it. Grace turned the key, but instead of the engine starting, there was only a clicking sound. She tried again with the same result. "Oh, come on, Betsy," she muttered, trying a third time. "Not now." "Battery?" Harrison asked. "Probably. She's been acting up lately." Grace sighed, leaning back against the seat. "I'm so sorry, Henry. I've trapped us here." The rain drummed against the roof with increasing intensity, and Harrison could see that the streets were already beginning to flood. They weren't going anywhere soon. "It's not your fault," he said. "These things happen. My dad always says that Betsy has a sixth sense about storms. Maybe she's just trying to keep us safe." Grace's voice held a note of forced cheerfulness that didn't quite hide her embarrassment. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain cascade down the windshield. The storm had transformed the busy Pittsburgh street into something intimate and cocoon-like. In the gray light, Grace's profile was soft and thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Harrison's stomach clenched. "Of course. What were you doing on Fifth Avenue today?" "It's not exactly. I mean, there aren't many services for homeless folks in that area." The question he'd been dreading. Harrison's mind scrambled for a plausible explanation. "I was looking for work. Construction jobs. Someone told me there might be opportunities downtown." "In the financial district?" "I get confused sometimes. The city's still new to me." He hated how easily the lies came now, how each one led to another. Grace nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. I still get lost here, and I've been coming to Pittsburgh for years." "Where are you staying?" "A shelter. Different ones." The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. "That must be hard. Never having a place that's really yours." "It is," Harrison said quietly, and for once, it wasn't entirely a lie. His penthouse had never felt like home, just an expensive cage. "I wish I could help," Grace said. "I mean, we don't have much, but the farm has a guest room. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry." "Grace, no." The offer was so generous, so completely without self-interest, that it made his chest ache. "I couldn't impose. It wouldn't be imposing. My dad always says that hospitality is about sharing what you have, not what you don't have." She turned to face him more fully. "Besides, I'd like the company. It gets lonely out there sometimes." Harrison closed his eyes, overwhelmed by her kindness. Here was this woman, struggling to save her family's farm, offering shelter to a stranger she believed was homeless. The magnitude of her generosity made his deception feel even more unforgivable. "You don't know me," he said. "I could be dangerous." "Are you?" "No, but..." "Then what's the real reason you don't want to accept help?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Harrison found himself trapped by his own web of lies, unable to explain that he couldn't accept her hospitality because he was already living a lie too big to sustain. "I don't like being a burden," he said finally. "Everyone needs help sometimes. It doesn't make you a burden, it makes you human." Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "My mom used to say that refusing help is just another form of pride." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the small truck. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and Harrison could see that the storm was only getting worse. "Tell me about your mom," he said, desperate to change the subject. Grace's face softened. "She was incredible. Taught me everything I know about gardening, about cooking, about seeing the good in people. She had this way of making everyone feel welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from." "What happened to her?" "Cancer. 2 years ago." Grace's voice was steady, but Harrison could hear the grief underneath. She fought hard, but sometimes fighting isn't enough. I'm sorry. She would have liked you, Grace said suddenly. She always said that the most interesting people were the ones who'd been through something. That struggle makes you more compassionate. Harrison's throat tightened. She sounds wise. She was. She's the reason I became a teacher, actually. She said that helping children learn was the closest thing to magic she could imagine. Grace smiled at the memory. She always wanted to travel, to see the world beyond our little town. But then my dad got sick, and the farm needed work, and life happened. Do you ever regret staying? Grace considered the question. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that teaching job in Philadelphia. Better pay, more opportunities. But then I think about my students, about the way little Tommy Peterson's face lights up when he finally understands a math problem, or how Lucy Chin draws pictures of our farm after I tell stories about it. She shrugged. Maybe making a difference in a small place is just as important as making a big splash somewhere else. The contrast between her contentment and his own restlessness was stark. Harrison had spent his entire adult life chasing bigger deals, more money, greater success, and yet this woman who'd never left her hometown seemed to have found something he'd been searching for his entire life. You're remarkable, he said quietly. I'm ordinary. Just a small-town teacher who loves her students and her family. That's what makes you remarkable. Grace turned to look at him, and in the dim light of the storm, something shifted between them. The air in the small truck felt charged with more than just the electricity of the storm outside. Henry, she said softly, can I tell you something? Anything. I haven't felt this connected to someone in a long time. Maybe ever. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know we just met, and I know you're dealing with a lot, but there's something about you. Something that makes me want to know everything about your story. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. She was offering him exactly what he'd been searching for, genuine connection, someone who wanted to know him for who he was, except she didn't know who he was at all. Grace, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm not the man you think I am. None of us are completely. But I'd like to find out who you really are, if you'll let me. The storm raged around them, trapping them in their small sanctuary, and Harrison realized that somewhere in the space between her kindness and his deception, something real had begun to grow. Something that would make the inevitable revelation of his lies infinitely more painful for both of them. But as Grace's hand found his in the darkness, as her fingers intertwined with his, Harrison discovered that some collisions created something beautiful even as they destroyed everything else. The question was whether either of them would survive the impact. Have you ever felt an instant connection with someone that scared you because it was so intense? How do you know when someone is worth the risk of vulnerability? Share your experiences in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the courage it takes to love. The rain had softened to a gentle patter by the time Grace's truck finally started, but neither of them seemed eager to break the spell that had settled over them in the storm's embrace. Grace drove slowly through the flooded streets, taking the long way back to Millfield, as if she too wanted to preserve this fragile moment between them. The farm's about 20 minutes from here, she said, glancing at Harrison in the passenger seat. Are you sure you're okay with this? Dad won't mind, he's always bringing home strays. Harrison's stomach twisted at the innocent comment. Strays? Injured animals, mostly. Last month it was a barn owl with a broken wing. Before that, a fox caught in a trap. Grace's voice warmed with affection. Mom used to say he collected broken things because he knew how to fix them. If only it were that simple, Harrison thought. Some things were too broken to fix, and some deceptions too deep to forgive. As they left the city behind, the landscape transformed into rolling hills dotted with farmhouses and silos. The storm had washed the October countryside clean, and everything gleamed with fresh rain. Harrison found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in months, watching Grace's profile as she navigated the winding country roads. Tell me about your childhood, he said, surprising himself with the question. When was the last time he'd asked someone about their past without calculating what it might mean for business? Grace's face lit up. It was magical, honestly. Not in a fairy tale way. We worked hard, and money was always tight, but there was this sense of belonging, you know? Like every tree and stone on that land was part of our family story. She turned onto a gravel road marked by a weathered sign, Miller Family Farm, EST 1887. The headlights swept across neat rows of pumpkins and apple trees, and in the distance, Harrison could see the warm glow of lights in a two-story farmhouse. My great-great-grandfather built that house with his own hands, Grace continued. Every generation has added something, the wraparound porch, the barn, the apple orchard. My mom planted those sunflowers along the fence line when I was 10. She said they were like prayers made visible. The truck crunched to a stop in front of the house, and Harrison could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through corn stalks. It was a world away from Manhattan's glass towers and honking traffic. "It's beautiful," he said, meaning it completely. "It's home." Grace's voice carried a note of sadness. Or it was. "We might lose it soon." "What do you mean?" Grace turned off the engine and sat back in her seat. "Bank payments. We're behind, and Dad's too proud to ask for help. He keeps saying we'll figure it out, but the numbers don't lie." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Funny thing is, it would probably take less money than some people spend on a car to save this place." Harrison's chest tightened. The amount she was talking about was pocket change to him, less than he'd spent on wine last month. But Henry Brooks couldn't offer that kind of help without raising impossible questions. "How much?" he asked quietly. 43,000. Might as well be 43 million. Grace shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Come on, let's get you inside before you catch pneumonia." The farmhouse was exactly what Harrison had expected: worn hardwood floors, handmade quilts, and the lingering scent of apple cinnamon. But what struck him most was the sense of history in every corner, the feeling that this place had been loved by generations of families. "Dad?" Grace called out. "I brought a friend for dinner." Thomas Miller emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands, the kind of person who'd worked hard his entire life and had the weathered face to prove it. "Dad, this is Henry Brooks." "Henry, my father, Thomas." Thomas extended his hand, and Harrison shook it, noting the firm grip and the way the older man's eyes studied him without judgment. "Any friend of Grace's is welcome here," Thomas said simply. "Hope you're hungry." Grace made her famous pot roast. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense. We always make enough for company, even when we're not expecting any." Thomas smiled. "Old habit from Grace's mother. She said you never knew when someone might need a good meal and a safe place to sit." Dinner was a revelation. Harrison couldn't remember the last time he'd sat around a table that wasn't made of conference room mahogany, eating food that hadn't been prepared by a restaurant chef. The pot roast was tender and flavorful, the vegetables fresh from their garden, and the conversation flowed naturally between stories of farm life and gentle questions about Henry's background. "Where are you from originally?" Thomas asked, passing him the mashed potatoes. Harrison had prepared for this question. "California. My parents died when I was young, and I made some bad choices. Ended up on the streets." The lies came easier now, which frightened him. "I'm sorry about your parents," Grace said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was. I guess I never learned how to ask for help." That part, at least, was true. "Well, you're asking now," Thomas said. "That takes courage." After dinner, Grace showed him to the guest room, a small but comfortable space with a patchwork quilt and a window overlooking the apple orchard. The room was simple but clean, with a wooden cross on the wall and a vase of late-blooming flowers on the nightstand. "Mom always kept flowers in here," Grace explained. "She said guests should feel welcomed, not just tolerated." Harrison sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the generosity of these people who had so little but gave so freely. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something floral and uncomplicated. "What is it?" "I haven't been entirely honest with you." Grace's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Harrison's mind raced. He couldn't tell her the truth, not yet, but he needed to give her something real. "I wasn't always homeless. I had a job once, a good one. I lost it because I made some mistakes. Pride, mostly. I thought I was better than I was." "What kind of work did you do?" "Business. Corporate stuff. I was good at it, maybe too good. I started believing that success meant I was somehow superior to other people." Harrison's voice grew thick with genuine emotion. I hurt people. People who cared about me. And when everything fell apart, I realized I had no idea who I was without the job, without the money, without all the things I thought made me important. Grace reached for his hand. That's why you don't want help. You're punishing yourself. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't deserve it. Everyone deserves kindness, Henry. Everyone deserves a second chance. Grace's voice was firm. My mom used to say that we're all just broken people trying to figure out how to love each other better. Harrison looked at her, really looked, and saw something he'd never encountered before: unconditional acceptance. She wasn't trying to fix him or change him or get something from him. She was simply offering her presence, her caring, her belief that he was worth saving. What if I told you I'd done something terrible, he whispered. Something that would make you think differently of me? Like what? What if I'd lied to you? What if I wasn't who you think I am? Grace was quiet for a long moment. I'd probably be hurt. But I'd also wonder why you felt like you had to lie. People don't lie about important things unless they're protecting themselves from something. Or protecting someone else. That too. Grace studied his face in the lamplight. Henry, whatever you're carrying, whatever you're running from, it doesn't have to define you. You get to choose who you are from this moment forward. Harrison felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but expanding. For the first time in years, he imagined a different version of himself. Not the ruthless businessman or the empty billionaire, but someone worthy of Grace's faith. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. What do you want? Not for your family or your students or the farm. What do you want for yourself? Grace smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I used to want to travel. See the world, experience different cultures. I had this fantasy of teaching English in Costa Rica or working on a wildlife preserve in Africa. She shrugged. Silly dreams. They're not silly. They're not practical either. Real life doesn't work that way, at least not for people like me. What if it could? What do you mean? Harrison almost told her then. Almost explained that he could make her dreams come true, that $43,000 was nothing, that she could have any life she wanted. But he stopped himself. That would be Harrison Blake's solution, throwing money at problems, buying his way out of complexity. Instead, he said, I mean, what if you're wrong about what's possible? What if the life you want is closer than you think? Grace leaned closer, and Harrison could feel the warmth of her breath against his cheek. What about you? What do you want? The answer came without hesitation, you. The word hung between them like a confession, and Harrison saw something shift in Grace's eyes. She moved closer, her hand coming up to touch his face, and he knew she was going to kiss him. Grace, he whispered, I'm not. I know you're not ready, she said softly. I know you're scared. But I also know that whatever brought you to my life, I'm grateful for it. When her lips met his, it was gentle and questioning, offering without demanding. Harrison had kissed many women, but this felt like the first time, tentative and precious and real. When they broke apart, Grace rested her forehead against his. I've never felt this way about anyone, she whispered. Neither have I, Harrison replied, and it was the truest thing he'd said since meeting her. Later, lying alone in the guest room, Harrison stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the farmhouse settling around him. Somewhere down the hall, Grace was probably lying awake too, thinking about what was happening between them. He thought about his penthouse, sitting empty 37 floors above the city. He thought about the business deals waiting on his desk, the board meetings he was missing, the empire that ran itself while he played at being someone else. But mostly, he thought about the woman who'd offered him shelter from the storm and somehow made him remember what it felt like to be human. The question was whether he'd have the courage to tell her the truth before she discovered it herself. And whether either of them would survive the revelation when it came. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of the guest room, and Harrison woke to sounds he hadn't heard in decades, roosters crowing, cattle lowing, and the distant hum of a tractor starting up. For a moment, he forgot where he was, forgot who he was supposed to be. Then the scent of bacon and coffee drifted up from the kitchen, and he remembered, he was Henry Brooks, and for the first time in years, he had somewhere to belong. He dressed quickly in the clothes Grace had found for him, a soft flannel shirt that had belonged to her late uncle and jeans that fit surprisingly well. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Without his expensive suits and polished shoes, he looked ordinary. Human. Downstairs, he found Grace at the stove, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing a yellow sundress that made her look like sunshine itself. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and her smile was brighter than the October morning. "Good morning, sleepyhead. I was starting to think you'd sleep until noon." "What time is it?" 7:30. "We're early risers around here." She handed him a steaming mug of coffee. "Dad's already been up for 2 hours checking on the animals. He says you're welcome to help if you're interested." Harrison sipped the coffee, strong and bitter, nothing like the artisanal blends he was used to, and found it perfect. "I'd like that. Fair warning, farm work is dirty, exhausting, and doesn't pay much. But there's something honest about it that I think you might appreciate." She was right. Within an hour, Harrison found himself knee-deep in work that would have horrified his Manhattan colleagues. He mucked out stalls, hauled feed, and helped Thomas repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the storm. His hands, soft from years of boardroom meetings, quickly developed blisters. His back ached from bending and lifting. And he loved every minute of it. "You're a natural," Thomas said as they worked side by side, replacing wooden fence posts. "Most city folks can't handle this kind of work." "I'm not most city folks," Harrison replied, then caught himself. "I mean, I've done manual labor before." "Still, you've got good instincts. The animals trust you, that's not something you can fake." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and Harrison found himself thinking about what Thomas had said. Trust. These people, Grace, her father, even the farm animals, trusted him completely. They had no idea who he really was, what he was capable of, or what he'd built his fortune on. They simply accepted him as he presented himself. The weight of that trust should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like the heaviest burden he'd ever carried. "Thomas," he said suddenly, "what would you do if someone you cared about had lied to you about something important?" The older man paused in his hammering. "Depends on the lie, I suppose. And the reason behind it." "What do you mean?" "Well, there's lying to hurt someone, and there's lying to protect them. There's lying because you're ashamed, and lying because you're afraid. The lie might be the same, but the heart behind it makes all the difference." Harrison absorbed this, wondering which category his deception fell into. What if the lie was about who you really are? Thomas studied him carefully. "Son, I've been watching you for the past day. You're gentle with the animals, respectful to my daughter, and you work hard without complaining. That tells me more about who you are than any words could. But what if? Henry." Thomas's voice was firm but kind. "We all have things we're not proud of. Things we've done, things we've been. But Grace's mother taught me something important. You can't build a future on a foundation of shame. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to be defined by your worst moments or your best ones." That afternoon, Grace insisted on showing him the rest of the farm. They walked through the apple orchard, where the trees were heavy with fruit, and she told him stories of climbing these same branches as a child. They visited the small cemetery where 4 generations of Millers were buried, including her mother's grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Eleanor Miller, she made everything beautiful." "I come here when I need to think," Grace said, kneeling to place fresh flowers on the grave. "Mom always knew what to do, no matter how complicated things got." "What would she tell you now? About the farm, about everything?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "She'd probably say that some things are worth fighting for, and some things are worth letting go of. The trick is knowing which is which." They sat on a wooden bench overlooking the valley, and Harrison felt a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke and apple cider from the farmhouse. "Can I tell you something?" Grace said, her voice unusually hesitant. "Anything. I've been thinking about what you said last night. About wanting to travel, to see the world." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been so focused on holding on to this place that I forgot there might be other ways to honor my family's memory." "What do you mean?" "Maybe Mom planted those sunflowers not just to make this place beautiful, but to remind me that beautiful things can grow anywhere. Maybe the real gift she gave me wasn't the farm itself, but the ability to make anywhere feel like home." Harrison turned to look at her, struck by the quiet wisdom in her words. "You're thinking about leaving?" "I'm thinking about living. Really living, not just surviving." Grace met his eyes. "What if we did it together?" "Did what?" Figured out what comes next. You said you wanted to find a different life, and I'm starting to think maybe I do too. We could help each other. The suggestion hit Harrison like a physical blow. She was offering him everything he'd ever wanted, a chance to start over, to build something real with someone who saw past his wealth and status. But she was offering it to Henry Brooks, not Harrison Blake. And Henry Brooks didn't exist. Grace, I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 2 days. But sometimes you meet someone and you just know, you know? Her cheeks flushed pink. Am I being ridiculous? No, Harrison said quietly. You're being brave. Braver than I've ever been. Then why do you look so sad? Because I'm living a lie, he wanted to say. Because I'm falling in love with you under false pretenses. Because I have the power to save your farm, to give you any life you want, but I'm too much of a coward to tell you who I really am. Instead, he said, I'm not sad. I'm scared. Of what? Of not deserving this. Of not being good enough for you. Grace moved closer, taking his hand in both of hers. Henry, listen to me. I don't care what you used to do or what mistakes you've made. I care about the man who held me during the storm, who worked beside my father without complaint, who looks at me like I'm the most precious thing in the world. You are, Harrison whispered. You're the most precious thing in any world. When she kissed him this time, it was different from the night before. Less tentative, more certain. It was a kiss that spoke of possibilities, of a future they might build together. Harrison kissed her back with all the longing and hope and desperation in his heart, knowing it might be the last time. That evening, they cooked dinner together, a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables from the garden. Grace taught him how to make her grandmother's cornbread, laughing as he struggled with the measurements and timing. Thomas joined them for dessert, an apple pie that Grace had made with fruit from their orchard. This is the best meal I've had in years, Harrison said, meaning it completely. It's just food, Grace replied, but her eyes sparkled with pleasure. No, it's not. It's love made visible. After dinner, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge over the farm. Grace was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and Harrison felt a contentment he'd never known was possible. Tell me about your dreams, he said softly. The real ones, not the practical ones. Grace was quiet for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she said, I dream about teaching children in places where education is a luxury. About helping people tell their stories. About making a difference in ways that matter. What's stopping you? Fear, mostly. Fear of leaving everything I know, fear of failing, fear of being alone in the world. You wouldn't be alone. Wouldn't I? Harrison tightened his arms around her. Not if I had anything to say about it. Promise me something, Grace said suddenly. What? Promise me that whatever happens, you'll remember this moment. This feeling. The way it feels to be completely yourself with someone who accepts you exactly as you are. Harrison's throat tightened. I promise. Good. Because I have a feeling our lives are about to get very complicated. She was right, of course. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deceptions, new opportunities for everything to fall apart. But for now, under the October stars, Harrison Blake allowed himself to believe that love might be enough to overcome anything. Even the truth. What do you think is the most important foundation for a lasting relationship? Shared values, complete honesty, or the willingness to grow together? How do you navigate the balance between protecting someone you love and being truthful with them? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love's most challenging moments. The morning of October 15th started like any other day that week. Harrison woke to the sound of Grace humming in the kitchen, her voice floating up through the farmhouse like a melody he wanted to memorize. For 6 blissful days, he'd lived in this pocket of paradise, helping with the farm work, sharing meals at the wooden table, falling deeper in love with a woman who saw Henry Brooks as worthy of her heart. He dressed quickly in his borrowed clothes, the flannel shirt now soft and familiar against his skin, and headed downstairs to find Grace packing sandwiches into a wicker basket. What's all this? He asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. We're going to town today, she said, leaning back against his chest. I need to pick up some supplies, and I thought you might like to see more of Millfield. Plus, Mrs. Patterson at the general store makes the best apple cider donuts this side of Philadelphia. Harrison's stomach clenched. He'd been carefully avoiding town, making excuses about crowds and unfamiliar places. But Grace's excitement was infectious, and he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. "Sounds perfect," he lied. The drive to Millfield took 20 minutes along winding country roads lined with maple trees in their full autumn glory. Grace chattered about the history of the town, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of her childhood adventures. Harrison tried to focus on her words, but anxiety gnawed at him. What if someone recognized him? What if his carefully constructed world came crashing down? "You're quiet today," Grace observed as they pulled into the town square. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different this is from anywhere I've ever lived." It wasn't entirely a lie. Millfield was like stepping back in time, a classic small town with a courthouse square, mom-and-pop shops, and the kind of Main Street that Norman Rockwell might have painted. Children played in the park while their mothers chatted on benches. Old men gathered outside the hardware store, solving the world's problems over coffee and checkers. "Different good or different bad?" Grace asked. "Different perfect." They spent the morning wandering through the shops. Grace introduced him to everyone they met: Mrs. Patterson at the general store, Tom Bradley at the hardware shop, the Reverend Williams outside the Methodist church. Each person welcomed Henry with the easy acceptance of a small community, and Harrison felt the weight of their trust settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. At the general store, Grace picked up flour and sugar while Harrison waited by the window, watching the peaceful rhythm of small-town life. That's when he saw it, the familiar black town car pulling up to the curb across the street. His blood turned to ice. The car door opened, and Harrison's worst nightmare stepped out, his business partner and closest friend, Marcus Chen, looking every inch the wealthy executive in his tailored navy suit and Italian leather shoes. He was talking on his phone, gesturing animatedly as he always did during important calls. Harrison ducked behind a display of canned goods, his heart hammering against his ribs. What was Marcus doing here? How had he found him? "Henry?" Grace's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I need some air." "Of course. Let me just pay for these and we can." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "I mean, I'll wait outside." "Take your time." He practically fled from the store, but there was nowhere to hide on the small Main Street. Marcus was still on the phone, pacing back and forth in front of the courthouse. Harrison pulled his baseball cap lower and turned away, but it was too late. "Harrison? Harrison Blake." The voice cut through the October air like a blade. Harrison closed his eyes, feeling his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "I don't believe it," Marcus said, jogging across the street. "What are you doing here? I've been trying to reach you for days. Jessica said you disappeared, and the Peterson merger is falling apart without you." "Marcus, please. And what are you wearing? Is this some kind of joke? Please tell me you're not having some kind of breakdown." Harrison glanced desperately at the general store, where Grace was still inside, blissfully unaware that her world was about to shatter. "Marcus, I can explain, but you need to keep your voice down." "Keep my voice down?" "Harrison, you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. You can't just vanish to play farmer in the middle of nowhere. Do you have any idea what the board is saying? What the stock price has done?" "I don't care about the stock price." Marcus stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "You don't care? This is your life's work. Your father's legacy. What's happened to you? Maybe I finally figured out what actually matters." "Which is what?" "Hiding in some backwater town pretending to be someone you're not." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow, partly because they were true. He was hiding. He was pretending. But it was also more than that. He'd found something here that he'd never had in his billionaire's paradise. He'd found belonging. "It's complicated," he said quietly. "Complicated how?" "Harrison, talk to me. We've been friends for 15 years. Whatever's going on, we can fix it." Harrison was about to respond when the general store door chimed, and Grace emerged with her shopping bag. She looked from Harrison to Marcus, taking in the expensive suit, the silk tie, the Rolex watch, and Harrison saw the exact moment when pieces began clicking into place. "Henry," she said slowly. "Who's your friend?" Marcus looked confused. "Henry? His name is Harrison Blake. He's the CEO of Blake Aviation." The shopping bag slipped from Grace's hands, spilling flour and sugar across the sidewalk. Her face went pale, then flushed with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake," Marcus said, still oblivious to the devastation he was causing. "This is Harrison Blake, my business partner. Though I have to say, I've never seen him dressed like a homeless person?" Grace finished, and the words came out like shattered glass. Harrison reached for her, but she stepped back as if his touch might burn her. "Grace, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for a week? That everything you told me was a lie?" "Not everything. My feelings for you, what we shared." "What we shared?" Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What exactly did we share?" "Because I shared my heart with someone who doesn't even exist." Marcus finally seemed to understand that he'd stumbled into something delicate. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "Are you too?" "No," Grace said firmly. "We're nothing. We never were anything." "Grace, please. Don't." She held up a hand, and Harrison saw tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Don't you dare use that name. Don't you dare pretend you know me. I do know you. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you realize. I know you put honey in your coffee and hum when you're happy. I know you're afraid of thunderstorms, but you face them anyway. I know. You know Henry Brooks. But Henry Brooks doesn't exist, does he?" Grace's voice cracked. "He's just another one of your possessions, another thing you bought and paid for." "That's not true. Isn't it? You're a billionaire, Harrison. You could buy this entire town if you wanted to. You could have solved all our problems with pocket change. But instead, you chose to play dress up and pretend to be poor. Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" "I wasn't pretending to be poor. I was trying to be real." "Real?" Grace shook her head. "You spent a week living in our guest room, eating our food, working our land, letting us feel sorry for you. You watched my father worry about losing the farm, watched me break my heart over it, and you said nothing. You have the power to help us, and you chose to watch us suffer instead." "I wanted to help. I wanted to tell you, but what? You were having too much fun slumming with the peasants?" The accusation hit Harrison like a slap. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were playing a game, and I was the prize." Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps I should go." "No," Grace said, not taking her eyes off Harrison. "You should stay. You should hear what kind of man your friend really is." "Grace, you're upset. I understand that. But you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in a week. I'm thinking about how you held me during the storm, how you let me cry on your shoulder about our problems. I'm thinking about how you kissed me and told me I was precious while you were lying to my face. I never lied about my feelings for you." "Your feelings?" Grace's voice rose. "You don't even know what feelings are. You're so used to buying everything you want that you thought you could buy love too. Well, congratulations, Harrison. You got exactly what you paid for, a poor farm girl who was stupid enough to fall for your act." "Don't talk about yourself that way." "Why not? It's the truth, isn't it? The naive little farm girl who thought a rich man could actually care about her. What a joke." "Grace, stop. Please." "Stop what? Stop being angry? Stop feeling betrayed? Stop loving someone who never existed." Tears were streaming down her face now. "You know what the worst part is? For a few days, I actually believed I was worth something. I believed someone could see past the dirt under my fingernails and the worn-out clothes and love me for who I am. But you can't love someone when you're too busy lying to them. I do love you. You love the idea of me. The fantasy of simple farm life and uncomplicated love. But you don't love me, because you don't even know me. You know the woman who was grateful for your attention, who was impressed by your kindness, who didn't ask too many questions. That's not love, Harrison. That's possession." Harrison felt something breaking inside his chest. "That's not true. Isn't it? Tell me honestly, if I'd known who you really were from the beginning, would you have been interested in me at all? Or would I have been just another gold digger trying to get close to your money?" The question hung in the air between them, and Harrison's silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," Grace whispered. "You needed me to be pure, to be innocent, to be worthy of your love. But the only way I could be worthy was if I didn't know what I was worth to you. Grace. I need you to leave. Both of you. I need you to get in your expensive car and drive back to your billion-dollar world and leave us alone. I'm not going anywhere. We need to talk about this. No, we don't. We don't have anything to talk about because we don't know each other. We never did. Grace turned and walked away, leaving Harrison standing in the middle of Main Street with his heart in pieces and his carefully constructed lies scattered around him like the flour from her dropped shopping bag. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. Harrison, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know what? That I'm a coward? That I'm so damaged I can't even tell the truth to the woman I love? You're not a coward. You're just lost. But this isn't the way to find yourself. Harrison watched Grace disappear around the corner, probably heading to the farm to pack his things and erase every trace of Henry Brooks from their lives. I found myself with her. And I just lost myself too. She'll come around. When she's had time to think. No, she won't. And she shouldn't. I did exactly what she said I did. I treated her like an experiment, like a game. I let her suffer while I had the power to help her, all because I was too selfish to risk losing her. You were protecting yourself. I was protecting a lie. And now I've lost everything that mattered. Harrison looked around at the small town that had briefly felt like home, at the people who had welcomed Henry Brooks with open arms and would probably never forgive Harrison Blake for his deception. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and success. But in one moment, he'd lost the only thing that had ever made him feel truly rich. He'd lost Grace. And this time, all the money in the world couldn't buy back what he'd thrown away. Have you ever been in a situation where protecting yourself meant hurting someone you cared about? How do you rebuild trust after it's been broken? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else navigate their own difficult choices. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love's most challenging moments. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum when Harrison returned to Manhattan 3 days later. The familiar luxury, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the view that had once made him feel like king of the world, now seemed like a gilded cage. He stood in the same spot where he'd hatched his plan weeks ago, staring down at the city lights, but this time the emptiness felt different. Before, it had been the hollow ache of loneliness. Now it was the sharp agony of loss. Marcus had driven him back to the city in silence, occasionally glancing at his friend with concern but wise enough not to push. The Peterson merger had indeed fallen apart, the board was furious, and the stock price had taken a significant hit. But Harrison couldn't bring himself to care about any of it. What was the point of building an empire if you had no one to share it with? Sir? Jessica's voice came through the intercom. The board meeting is in an hour. Should I tell them you're ready to discuss the recovery plan? Harrison didn't answer. He was holding the flannel shirt he'd worn at the farm, the one that smelled like Grace's lavender soap and autumn mornings. He'd found it in his overnight bag, along with a small carved wooden horse that must have fallen from Grace's pocket during one of their walks. The horse was simple, crude even, obviously whittled by hand. But it was the most precious thing he'd ever owned. Sir? Cancel the meeting. Sir, the board is expecting. I said cancel it. Harrison walked to his bedroom and pulled out his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He'd started a dozen emails to Grace over the past 3 days, each one deleted before he could send it. What could he possibly say that would undo the damage? How could he explain that Henry Brooks wasn't a lie? He was the man Harrison had always wanted to be. Grace, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I need you to know that when I was with you, I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was finally being myself. Delete. Dear Grace, I've been sitting here trying to find the words to make this right, but I'm starting to realize that some things can't be fixed with words. I destroyed your trust, and I have to live with that. But I can't live with you thinking that what we had wasn't real. Delete. Grace, I love you. I know I have no right to say that after what I did, but it's the only truth I have left. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see beauty in simple things. I love that you made me want to be better than I am. I love that for a few days, you made me feel like I was home. Delete. Each deleted message felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. How do you apologize for breaking someone's heart when your apology might break it all over again? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, board meeting moved to tomorrow. Take the time you need, but we have to deal with this eventually. Harrison set the phone aside and walked to his safe, pulling out a folder he hadn't looked at in years. Inside were letters from his father, written during Harrison's college years when his dad was building Blake Aviation from nothing. One letter in particular caught his attention. Son, I hope you understand that money is just a tool. It can build hospitals or weapons, bring people together or drive them apart. The man who wields it determines its purpose. Don't let the tool use you instead of the other way around. Remember that your worth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. Harrison had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. He'd let money become his identity instead of his instrument. He'd let wealth isolate him instead of connecting him to others. And when he'd finally found someone who could love him for who he was, he'd been too afraid to trust her with the truth. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still a way to honor his father's memory and grace his heart. He opened his laptop again and began typing, but this time he wasn't writing to Grace. He was writing to his lawyer. Meanwhile, Grace sat in her mother's old rocking chair on the farmhouse porch, staring out at the fields that would soon belong to someone else. The bank had called that morning with their final notice. They had 2 weeks to vacate the property. Her father was inside, going through family photos and deciding what they could afford to store and what they'd have to leave behind. The sound of his quiet crying drifted through the open windows, and it broke Grace's heart all over again. She'd spent 3 days replaying every moment with Harrison, no, with Henry, trying to separate truth from lies. The way he'd held her during the storm, that had felt real. The tenderness in his voice when he'd told her she was beautiful, that had felt real too. But how could she trust any of it when it was all built on deception? The worst part was that she understood why he'd done it. She'd seen the loneliness in his eyes, the desperate hunger for genuine connection. In a twisted way, his deception was a compliment. He'd trusted her enough to believe she could love him without his money. But he hadn't trusted her enough to test that belief honestly. You're thinking about him again, her father said, stepping onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee. Grace accepted the mug gratefully. Is it that obvious? You get that same look your mother used to get when she was wrestling with something. I don't know what to think anymore, Dad. Part of me is so angry I could scream. But part of you still loves him. Grace nodded miserably. Does that make me pathetic? It makes you human. Love doesn't turn off just because someone hurts you. If it did, your mother would have stopped loving me years ago. This is different. He lied to me about everything. Did he? Or did he lie about one thing and tell you the truth about everything else? Grace looked at her father in surprise. You're defending him? I'm not defending what he did. I'm just saying that in all the years I've known people, I've learned that folks aren't usually all good or all bad. They're just broken in different ways. Some breaks can't be fixed. Maybe. But some can. The question is whether you think what you had was worth trying to fix. Grace set down her coffee and pulled her knees up to her chest. It doesn't matter what I think. He's gone back to his billion-dollar world, and we're about to lose the farm. Even if I could forgive him, we're from different planets. Are we? Because the man I saw helping me fix the barn roof didn't seem like he was from a different planet. He seemed like he was exactly where he belonged. That wasn't him, Dad. That was an act. Was it? Because I've been thinking about that, and I'm not so sure. The way he looked at you, the way he worked alongside me, the way he fit into our family, that didn't feel like acting to me. That felt like a man who'd found his home. Grace wanted to argue, but her father's words echoed thoughts she'd been trying to suppress. There had been moments, quiet moments when Harrison thought she wasn't looking, when she'd seen something raw and real in his face. A vulnerability that money couldn't buy and success couldn't mask. Even if you're right, she said quietly, it doesn't change what he did. He watched us struggle knowing he could help us, and he chose not to. Maybe he was scared. Scared of what? Of exactly what happened. Of losing you. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Well, he lost me anyway. Did he? Or did you lose each other? Before Grace could answer, they heard a car coming up the gravel drive. Grace's heart leaped, hoping against hope that it might be Harrison, but it was just the mailman with another stack of bills and foreclosure notices. Among the mail, however, was a large envelope addressed to her father from a law firm in New York. Inside was a letter that made both of them sit down hard. Dear Mr. Miller, we represent an anonymous client who wishes to purchase your farm for the sum of $2.5 million, significantly above its assessed value. The buyer wishes to lease the property back to you for $1 per year for as long as you wish to remain there. Additionally, our client would like to establish a foundation in your late wife's name to support other family farms in the area. If you are interested in this offer, please contact our office at your earliest convenience. We have been instructed to expedite this transaction and can have the paperwork completed within 48 hours. Sincerely, Davidson, Wright & Associates. Grace stared at the letter, her hands trembling. Dad, this is Harrison, Thomas said quietly. It has to be. We can't accept this. Why not? Because it's guilt money. He's trying to buy his way out of what he did. Or maybe he's trying to buy his way back into what he lost. Maybe he's trying to show you who he really is. Grace stood up abruptly and walked to the porch railing. I can't be bought, Dad. Our farm can't be bought. Our forgiveness can't be bought. No, they can't. But maybe that's not what he's trying to do. Maybe he's just trying to give you what you need to be happy, even if it doesn't include him. You think I should take it? I think you should consider what your mother would have wanted. She always said that pride was a luxury we couldn't afford when love was on the table. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She thought about her mother's garden, about the apple trees that would bloom again next spring, about the 4 generations of Miller women who had called this place home. Could she really let it all go because of her wounded pride? But more than that, she thought about Harrison's face when he'd told her he loved her. The raw honesty in his voice, the way his hands had shaken when he'd reached for her. Had that been real? Or had it all been part of the performance? I need time to think, she said finally. Time's the one thing we don't have much of, honey. The bank wants us out in 2 weeks. Grace nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to a different question entirely. If she did decide to forgive Harrison, if she did decide to take a chance on love despite the pain, would he even want her back? Or had he already moved on, satisfied that his conscience was clear and his guilt was paid for? There was only one way to find out. Dad, she said slowly, how do you feel about taking a trip to New York? Thomas smiled for the first time in days. I think your mother would have said it was about time. That evening, Harrison stood in his office after hours, staring at the contract his lawyer had prepared. It was simple enough, the sale of the Miller farm to a shell company, with the leaseback provision that would allow Grace and her father to stay as long as they wanted. It was the least he could do, the only thing he could think of that might ease the pain he'd caused. But as he lifted his pen to sign, he realized that this wasn't enough. Buying the farm was just another way of hiding, another way of avoiding the real issue. Grace didn't need his money, she needed his truth. She needed him to be brave enough to fight for their love instead of just throwing money at his mistakes. He set down the pen and picked up his phone, dialing the number he'd memorized but never had the courage to call. Hello? Grace's voice was cautious, uncertain. Grace? It's Harrison. Please don't hang up. I saw the offer from your lawyers. I know you probably think I'm trying to buy your forgiveness, but that's not what this is. I can't stand the thought of you losing your home because of me. Because of you? Harrison, we were going to lose the farm anyway. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I could have helped you from the beginning. I could have told you who I was and offered to help, but I was too selfish. You were scared. I understand that now. Harrison's heart stuttered. You do? I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I understand why you did it. You've been betrayed by people who only wanted your money, so you created a version of yourself that couldn't be betrayed that way. Grace, But here's the thing, Harrison. By not trusting me with the truth, you betrayed me first. You decided I wasn't strong enough or good enough or worthy enough to love you as you really are. That's not true. Isn't it? You were so convinced I would only love you for your money that you never gave me the chance to prove otherwise. Harrison closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. You're right. I was a coward. Yes, you were. But the question is, are you still? What do you mean? I mean, are you calling me because you feel guilty about what happened, or because you want to fight for us? I want to fight for us. I want to fight for you. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me with your heart. Then come home, Harrison. Come home and let's figure this out together. Home? The farm. Where you belong. Where Henry Brooks and Harrison Blake can finally be the same person. Harrison felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked away for years. I'll be there tonight. I'll be waiting. As Harrison hung up the phone and grabbed his keys, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't running away from who he was. He was running toward who he wanted to become. And Grace would be there to help him find his way home. What would you choose, pride or love? Have you ever had to decide between protecting your heart and taking a risk on someone who hurt you? Share your thoughts below, and remember to subscribe for more stories about the courage it takes to love authentically. The October moon hung full and bright over the Miller farm as Harrison's rental car crunched up the gravel driveway at nearly midnight. He'd driven straight through from Manhattan, his heart pounding harder with each mile that brought him closer to Grace. The farmhouse glowed with warm yellow light, and he could see her silhouette on the porch swing, waiting just as she'd promised. Harrison sat in the car for a moment, gathering his courage. This was it, the moment that would determine whether he'd spend the rest of his life alone or whether he'd found his home at last. He thought about his father's letter, about the tool of money and the man who wielded it. Tonight, he would discover what kind of man he truly was. Grace stood as he approached, her chestnut hair catching the moonlight. She wore the same yellow sundress she'd had on the day they'd picked apples together, and the sight of it made his chest tighten with longing. But her face was guarded, uncertain, and he could see the pain he'd caused still lingering in her green eyes. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would. You said a lot of things." Harrison stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, close enough to touch her but respecting the distance she needed. "Grace, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I broke your trust in the worst possible way. But I need you to know that every moment we shared was real. Every word I spoke about loving you was true. Even when you told me your name was Henry Brooks? Especially then. Because Henry Brooks is who I am when I'm with you. He's who I want to be all the time." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "How do I know you're not just saying what you think I want to hear? Because I'm not offering you my money anymore. I'm offering you my truth." Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small wooden horse that had fallen from her pocket. "This belongs to you." Grace's eyes widened as she took the carving. "Where did you?" "It was in my bag when I left. I've been carrying it with me ever since." He paused, swallowing hard. "Grace, I don't want to buy your forgiveness. I don't want to solve your problems with money. I want to earn your trust back by being the man you fell in love with, not Harrison Blake the billionaire, but the man who helped fix your barn and picked apples with you and held you during the storm. That man lied to me. That man was terrified of losing you. He'd never felt anything like what he felt for you, and he was too scared to risk it by telling the truth." Grace stepped down from the porch, moving closer to him. "And what about now? Are you still scared?" "Terrified. But I'm more scared of living without you than I am of losing you. Harrison." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I want to trust you. I want to forgive you. But I don't know how. One day at a time. One truth at a time. Let me show you who I really am, not as Henry Brooks or Harrison Blake, but as the man who loves you more than his next breath." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I missed you so much it physically hurt." "I know. I felt it too." He covered her hand with his, holding it against his cheek. "Grace, I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Not because I think I've earned it, but because what we have is too precious to lose without a fight." "What do we have, Harrison? How do I know this isn't just another performance?" Harrison took a deep breath and stepped back, pulling out his phone. "Because I'm about to do something that terrifies me more than losing billions on a bad investment." He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for the Wall Street Journal's business reporter who'd been hounding him for an exclusive interview for months. Grace watched in confusion as he dialed. "Tom? It's Harrison Blake. I know it's late, but I have the exclusive you've been wanting." "Yes, I'll go on record." "No, tomorrow morning is fine. I want to tell the world about the woman I love and how she changed my life." Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Harrison, what are you doing?" I'm making sure that the whole world knows who Grace Miller is and why she matters to me. I'm making sure there are no more secrets between us. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because I want everyone to know that Harrison Blake is madly in love with a farmer's daughter from Pennsylvania who makes the best apple pie in 3 counties and has a heart big enough to save a lost man's soul. Grace was crying now, but she was smiling too. You're crazy. Crazy about you. He ended the call and pulled her into his arms. Grace, I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can't promise that merging our worlds will be easy. But I can promise that I will never lie to you again. I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I love Henry Brooks and Harrison Blake and whoever you are in between. They're all the same person. They're all the man who belongs to you. Grace pulled back to look at him. There's something I need to tell you too. About the offer from your lawyers. You don't have to accept it. I meant what I said, I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness. I know. But my father and I talked about it, and we want to take it. Not because we need to be rescued, but because we want to build something together. The foundation in my mother's name, the work with other family farms, it's exactly what she would have wanted. Harrison's eyes lit up. Really? Really? But there's a condition. Anything. You have to promise that this isn't about guilt or obligation. If we're going to be partners in this, we're going to be equal partners. I may not have billions, but I have something just as valuable. I know how to love people without trying to change them. And I'm going to learn how to let myself be loved without trying to earn it. Grace smiled and pulled him down for a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out together. The business, the foundation, the life we want to build. All of it, together. And your world? The board meetings and the galas and the people who only care about your money. They'll have to accept that Harrison Blake comes with Grace Miller now. Package deal. Grace laughed. I don't know the first thing about being a billionaire's girlfriend. Good thing I don't know the first thing about being a farmer's boyfriend. We'll learn together. Thomas Miller appeared on the porch then, grinning widely. Well, it's about time you two figured it out. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in the barn together. Dad. Grace protested, but she was laughing. What? Your mother and I had our first real conversation locked in a barn during a thunderstorm. Sometimes fate needs a little help. He looked at Harrison seriously. You going to take care of my girl? With everything I have, sir. Good. Because if you hurt her again, I've got a shotgun and 40 acres to hide the body. Dad. I'm just saying. Thomas winked at Harrison. Welcome to the family, son. Hope you're ready for Sunday dinners and helping with the harvest. I wouldn't miss it for the world. 6 months later, Grace stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, wearing a midnight blue gown that Harrison had insisted on buying her for the Blake Aviation Charity Gala. The same event where 12 months ago, he'd felt so disconnected from everyone around him. Now, as she watched him speak passionately about the Elizabeth Miller Foundation and its mission to support family farms, she marveled at how much had changed. The foundation exists because of the generosity and wisdom of rural communities, Harrison was saying to the crowd of New York's elite. But more than that, it exists because a farmer's daughter from Pennsylvania taught a lost man what it means to be home. The applause was thunderous, but Grace only had eyes for Harrison as he left the podium and made his way back to her side. How was that? He asked, straightening his tie nervously. Perfect. Though I still can't believe you told 300 people that I make you want to be a better man. Because you do. Every single day. Grace adjusted his tie, marveling at how natural it felt to be here in his world, just as natural as it had felt to have him in hers. Your board of directors is staring at us. Let them stare. They'll get used to it. Besides, Peterson pulled me aside earlier and said the foundation angle has been incredible for company morale and public relations. Apparently, authenticity is good for business. Who knew? You did. You knew all along. The music began, and Harrison held out his hand. Dance with me? I thought you'd never ask. As they swayed together on the dance floor, Grace caught sight of their reflection in the ballroom's mirrored walls. She looked like she belonged here, but more importantly, she felt like she belonged here, not because of the gown or the setting, but because she was in Harrison's arms. "Penny, for your thoughts," he murmured against her ear. "Just thinking about how strange life is. A year ago, I was worried about losing the farm. Now I'm in a ballroom in Manhattan, and somehow it feels like the most natural thing in the world." "That's because you make anywhere feel like home. We make anywhere feel like home." Harrison spun her gently, and when she came back to his arms, his expression was suddenly serious. "Grace, there's something I need to ask you." "What is it?" "Well, I've been thinking about what comes next for us. About building a life together, about the foundation, about everything we want to do. And I realized that I don't want to do any of it without making sure you know how committed I am to this. To us." Grace's heart began to race as Harrison reached into his jacket pocket. "Harrison, what are you?" "I'm asking you to marry me." He pulled out a ring box, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the dance floor. "I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, my home for the rest of my life. I'm asking you to let me spend forever proving that the man who fell in love with you in that coffee shop is the same man who's kneeling here now." The ballroom went completely silent, hundreds of pairs of eyes focused on them, but Grace only saw Harrison. She saw the man who'd helped her father fix the barn, who'd held her during the storm, who'd had the courage to risk everything for love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." The room erupted in applause as Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. It was a simple solitaire, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "I love you, Grace Miller," he said against her lips. "I love you too, Harrison Blake." 1 year later, on a perfect September morning, Grace Miller became Grace Blake in a ceremony held in the apple orchard behind the farmhouse. The guest list was an eclectic mix of Manhattan socialites and Pennsylvania farmers, Wall Street executives and small-town teachers, all united in their love for the couple who had found each other against all odds. Harrison stood under an arch of apple branches, watching his bride walk down the aisle on her father's arm. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers from the farm. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When she reached him, Thomas placed Grace's hand in Harrison's and said quietly, "Take care of each other." "We will," they said in unison. The ceremony was simple, officiated by the same minister who had married Grace's parents 30 years before. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to love each other through wealth and poverty, joy and sorrow, truth and the occasional necessary fiction. "Do you, Harrison Blake, take Grace Miller to be your wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do. I take all of her, her strength, her kindness, her stubborn streak, and her ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves." "And do you, Grace Miller, take Harrison Blake to be your husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do. I take all of him, his complexity, his generosity, his terrible jokes, and his willingness to become the man I always knew he could be. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Pennsylvania, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Harrison whispered, "Hello, Mrs. Blake." "Hello, Mr. Blake. Ready for the adventure? With you? I'm ready for anything." As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Grace caught sight of the small wooden horse she'd carried in her bouquet, the same one that had fallen from her pocket that first day, the one that had brought them back together when everything seemed lost. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful love stories begin with the smallest moments. A collision outside a coffee shop, a kind word to a stranger, the courage to see past the surface to the heart beneath. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those moments grow into something that can change two lives forever. Harrison squeezed her hand as they reached the end of the aisle, and Grace squeezed back. They had found their way home to each other, and this was just the beginning. What's the most important quality you look for in a partner? Wealth, looks, or the ability to see your true self? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding authentic love in an inauthentic world. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.